The night of April 14, 1912, was unusually still. The ocean was completely flat, making it nearly impossible for the lookouts to spot waves breaking against the massive iceberg that suddenly emerged from the darkness dead ahead. The bridge ordered the helm hard a starboard, and the engines reversed. But the physics of a massive steel vessel at full speed meant the collision was unavoidable. In less than 3 hours, the largest moving man-made object on Earth would rest at the bottom of the Atlantic. This is the Cunard liner Mauritania. At the time, Cunard dominated the highly lucrative transatlantic route by holding the record for the fastest crossing. The rival White Star Line knew they could not win a race, so they pivoted their strategy entirely to scale and luxury. Here we see the colossal Olympic and Titanic under construction in Belfast. To build ships this large, the Harland and Wolff shipyard had to demolish 3 existing slipways and construct an enormous new gantry system. The Titanic alone cost the equivalent of $170 million modern dollars to construct, utilizing thousands of laborers over a span of 26 months. This diagram shows the core of the ship's safety engineering. The lower hull was divided by 15 transverse bulkheads, creating 16 distinct compartments. If the hull was breached, the bridge could remotely trigger vertically sliding doors to seal off the flooding. The math of the ship's displacement dictated it could stay afloat with any 2 adjacent compartments flooded, or even the first 4 completely open to the sea. This calculated margin of safety fostered absolute certainty among the builders, the crew, and the public that the vessel was practically unsinkable. Looking at the Southampton docks on April 10, the scale of the human logistics becomes clear. Over 2,200 passengers and crew boarded the Titanic on its maiden voyage, loading vast quantities of mail, cargo, and provisions. A one-way ticket for the most opulent first-class parlor suites cost up to $4,350, over $140,000 today, granting access to private promenades, a squash court, and a Turkish bath. Deep below decks, third-class immigrants were tightly packed into modest cabins, though they still enjoyed running water and electricity, amenities many had never experienced at home. Gliding toward the open ocean, the sheer size and comfort of the vessel insulated everyone on board. The luxury of the environment completely detached the passengers from the severe physical realities of the North Atlantic waiting ahead. A mild winter in Greenland had recently caused a high volume of icebergs to break off and shift rapidly. They drifted heavily into the primary shipping lanes, creating the worst ice conditions the region had seen in 50 years. Throughout April 14th, the Titanic's wireless operators received 7 separate messages from neighboring vessels, specifically warning of extensive drift ice directly in their path. The ship's wireless operators were severely backlogged, manually transmitting piles of personal messages for the wealthy passengers. When the nearby SS Californian sent a final urgent ice warning directly to the Titanic, operator Jack Phillips told the Californian to shut up so he could continue working. Captain Edward Smith, pictured here, altered the ship's course slightly south. However, he maintained a blistering speed of 22 knots. The pressure to deliver a luxurious, uninterrupted crossing overrode the mounting evidence of a massive ice field directly in front of them. At 11:40 p.m., the lookouts rang the bell. The helm was thrown hard to starboard and the engines were stopped. But the Titanic's rudder was remarkably small for an 882-foot vessel. It took 37 critical seconds for the bow to slowly begin swinging away from a direct hit. For decades, the public believed the iceberg tore a continuous 300-foot gash in the steel plates. Modern ultrasound scans of the wreck have proven that this massive tear is a myth. This animation illustrates what actually happened. Because heavy hydraulic machinery couldn't fit into the tight curve of the bow during construction, workers used hand-hammered wrought iron rivets instead of steel. Analysis revealed the rivets contained double the normal slag. In freezing water, they snapped instantly under the ice. The unzipping steel plates opened 6 narrow separations. Though only 12 square feet of damage, it spanned 6 watertight compartments, bypassing the ship's 4-compartment safety limit. A glancing blow, amplified by microscopic material flaws in the iron, structurally compromised the engineering marvel in less than a minute. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, inspected the forward holds. With the bow weighing down and water preparing to spill over the top of the bulkheads from one compartment into the next, he calculated the ship had no more than 2 hours to live. The 20 lifeboats on deck had a combined capacity of 1,178 people, covering just over half the passengers and crew. This shortage was entirely legal under 1894 Board of Trade regulations, which had been written for vessels a quarter of Titanic size. Look at these lifeboats suspended from the davits. Lowering them 90 feet into the dark ocean was a complex, terrifying process. Fearing the ropes and davits would buckle if fully loaded, and strictly enforcing a women and children first protocol, the crew launched the majority of the boats half empty. The mass casualty event that followed was dictated by math. There was a legally sanctioned lack of capacity to survive. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic slipped vertically beneath the surface. Over 1,500 people perished in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. Look at the survivors huddled in this wooden lifeboat. They drifted in the extreme cold for hours until the RMS Carpathia finally arrived to pull the 706 living passengers from the water. As front pages like this one circulated the globe, shock turned quickly to interrogation. Government inquiries on both sides of the Atlantic dismantled the White Star Line's narrative, exposing the outdated lifeboat regulations and condemning the reckless navigation at high speed through a known ice field. The disaster forced a complete overhaul of global maritime law, proving to regulators that ambitious technology could not replace essential safety standards. In this photograph, Dr. Robert Ballard announces his historic 1985 discovery of the wreck, resting in pitch darkness 12,000 feet deep in the Atlantic abyss. The deep-sea footage showed the decaying bow sitting far apart from the stern. This physical evidence proved the ship had violently torn itself in two at the surface, confirming the exact passenger testimony that officials had dismissed decades earlier. Subsequent expeditions recovered actual pieces of the hull plating and rivets. In metallurgical laboratories, forensic scientists finally established the extreme brittleness of the high slag iron in sub-zero temperatures. The legacy of the Titanic is visible in the sweeping maritime laws drafted in its wake, but as it continues to rust on the ocean floor, it remains a permanent, towering monument to the precise limits of engineering when human ambition meets the unforgiving forces of nature.